So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's program, Strategies to Support Your Child's Mental Health, What We Learned from the 2021 Darien Student Survey. My name is Emily Larkin. I am the Thriving Youth Program Director at the Community Fund of Darien. And in this role, I help coordinate the efforts of the Thriving Youth Task Force and our brand new Drug-Free Communities Grant. As you may know, in 2021, TYTF, in partnership with the Darien Public Schools, surveyed over 2,000 Darien 7th through 12th graders. We asked about their patterns of substance use, mental health, and the sources of stress and pressure. We were surprised to find that gender was the greatest predictor of youth mental health. And tonight we'll be discussing the specific risk and protective factors we uncovered by gender in our local data, as well as national data relating to the mental health of students who identify as transgender or non-binary. So to open tonight, I'll share a very brief 2-slide overview of our, forgive me, this is, we're gonna click around for a second, a 2-slide overview of what we found related to student mental health. Here you'll see we identified 5 different clusters based on student responses to several questions. Questions about their past 30-day mood, how they feel about themselves, and how they feel about their future. You'll see 46% of students fall into a category either anxious, vulnerable, or distressed. Now, when we looked at the gender composition for each of these 5 clusters, it was striking. You'll see females are overrepresented in the vulnerable and distressed categories, and males are much more likely to be in the thriving or okay categories. And this certainly doesn't discount females who are thriving and males who are distressed. This is just an overall big picture of what we learned. I want to note that we did have a subset of students who selected other or prefer not to answer for the gender question. We are not including their data here because the numbers were small and we couldn't responsibly draw statistically significant conclusions. As mentioned, we'll have some really compelling national data that will fill that gap. So that's a very brief overview of some findings from the student survey. And now I am very pleased to welcome 3 local experts who will be presenting tonight and leading our breakout discussions. First, Olivia Bucci is a licensed master social worker currently working at Newtown Middle School as a teen talk counselor through Kids in Crisis. Olivia has a master's in social work from the University of Connecticut and a bachelor's in social work from Sacred Heart University. Throughout her training, Olivia has worked with children and adolescents at Guilford Youth and Family Services and Trumbull Public Schools, where she's provided counseling, therapeutic interventions, and family therapy. Next, Andrew Tepper has 20 years of experience in individual and group psychotherapy in both the inpatient and outpatient settings. His therapeutic approach is integrative and holistic, engaging the imagination and calling upon a lifelong interest in the creative arts and the outdoors. He specializes in working with pre-adolescents, adolescents, adults, and families. His areas of focus include anxiety, depression, mood disorders, stress reduction, anger management, and conflict resolution. Andrew holds a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology from Bates College and received his Master's of Social Work from the Columbia University School of Social Work. Andrew founded Boda Therapy to provide clients with immersive, enjoyable therapeutic experiences in nature. And finally, Renee Reopell is a gender-free new Eurekan advocating for intentional mental resilience and well-being for transgender and non-binary folks. Renee received their Master's in Social Work at New York University and has been privileged to support young adults at Hetrick Martin Institute, Trinity Place Shelter, the Ackerman Institute for the Family, and Montefiore Hospital's first LGBTQ youth program, the Umbrella Program. Renee is currently the director of the Gender Diversity and Resilience Program through the Child Guidance Center of Southern Connecticut. They also work in private practice from a health equity framework. So we have a very impressive group tonight who will be sharing with you. And to begin, I'll turn it over to Olivia, Andrew, and Renee, who will share more insights from local and national data regarding student mental health, and then some recommendations for you as parents based on that data. Then we will transition to breakout rooms for Q&A and more discussion with each of the presenters. You will be able to select the breakout room you'd like to join. And while the beginning of tonight's program will be recorded, please note the breakout room conversation and Q&A will not be recorded. To submit questions in the breakout room, you can simply message the panelists through the direct chat button at the bottom of your screen. So that is all the housekeeping I have, and welcome. Thank you to our panelists for being here tonight. And Olivia, I will turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to the Thriving Youth Task Force for having me tonight, and great to meet you guys all over the computer. So currently I am a teen talk counselor at Newtown Middle School. And for this survey, it honestly parallels the children that I work with 7th and 8th. So in Darien, they found that the female students reported significantly higher levels of sadness, loneliness, and anxiety across all grades. And that was just compared to their male peers. And when looking at like the reasoning for this, it was found that there was definitely more social stress amongst females, particularly around social media, which could be for a variety of reasons. But social media has been found linked to increased feelings of depression, anxiety, poor body image, and loneliness. And as you guys all know, the more time they're spending on their phone, the more that there's chance for a negative exchange between their peers, as well as the constant comparison of this is on Instagram and this is on TikTok.
Do you mind if you go in the guest room?
So through this, we also found that there were higher levels of stress around parent expectations and parent opinions. Girls tended to be more sensitive to what their parents thought of them, their judgments, what they kind of expected of them in general. And this was also, they were experiencing stress around having little sense of control in family decisions and their personal decisions. And for them, it was really important that they felt valued in their environment, and that they had the ability to discuss sensitive teenage issues, which can be harder for girls, but it also is really important that they have that comfort in their life just when navigating this kind of stuff. It was also found that trying out new hobbies was helpful for them as well. And involvement in groups, which that could be a religious group, a peer group. It was really helpful for them to kind of have that support outside of their family. I'm not sure if I'm able to click it, but oh, thank you. So when talking about recommendations, and just to put this out there, I am not a parent. I can only base this off my experience. I think personally from what I've worked with, it's good to encourage your child, and obviously in a community like Darien, it's good for them to get involved, but it's also good to set clear, realistic expectations and allow them to have autonomy in choosing what they want to do. So if they want to play a sport, what sport they want to do, if they want to get a part-time job instead of playing a sport, having that discussion. Also when talking about colleges and academic courses, looking into why they want to go to that certain college and what they like about that college. In terms of courses, why they want to take that course. Even if you don't agree, it's good to engage in the conversation because it shows that what they're saying is important and that it's valuable to you. Also facilitating conversations with children, particularly girls, around sensitive teenage issues. Sometimes I feel like it's really easy to jump to advice, and sometimes I even do that with the kids that I work with, but using more validating language and less directive, solution-focused language. So if a student comes to me and they're telling me that they are having a trouble with their boyfriend or having a peer conflict, rather than just saying, oh, this is what I think you should do, I usually will look at it like, that sounds really challenging. And that sounds like you were hurt, like those kind of things, so that they know that they're being heard. Also, I think it is important to ask the child if they want advice before giving it, because sometimes they feel like they're not really being listened to, and they're more just, you know, like I'm not a parent, but I could totally relate, as you want to fix it. Like, you just want to make sure that everything's good for them. And sometimes all they want to do is be like, wow, like, I totally get you. This can like totally help like assist the child in navigating their own issues, rather than them just kind of like following your lead. And obviously for younger children, you're going to need more guidance, and you guys know your children, so you can kind of judge where you feel like you have that role. But as they get older and they've proven responsibility, I think trust is so important, like trusting them to make those decisions. And this, this encourages the child to make their own choices and promotes confidence in their decision making. So lastly, and this is more of a like housekeeping, like in your household, but I do think it's really important to create boundaries around social media and phone use. Just because this did show up as such a significant risk factor for girls. So in general, as you guys probably know, being plugged in all the time is not good for anyone, but it's especially harmful for the mental health of children. And as they're in these developing years, it can be kind of detrimental in a way that they're always having access to all this information at all times, and all their friends' reactions to things, and just it's detrimental. So encouraging your children to show you aspects of social media that they like and that they find valuable is really important, but it's also important to kind of like talk about the negative aspects to increase their awareness around how social media can be dangerous or how it can be kind of hurtful to them. I also think it's really important to limit phone use during dinner, family activities, or any time that they're really like engaging with a group. I think it's important that they are having that like in-person engagement, especially after COVID for this long. I think it's crucial that they're not like behind the screen, like talking to their friend who's miles away. And I would say this one is something that my supervisor actually brought up to me, but charging your phones outside your bedroom. I know that is so hard. And I know sometimes parents are on the bottom floor and children are on the top floor, and you want to still have that communication, God forbid anything happened. But it is so much better for the child's sleep. And then they're not having access to their friends like all through the night, or staying up too late, or even like waking up in the middle of the night and checking what's going on. I do know a lot of children use their phone as an alarm too, so I completely understand that as well. But I think it's important that they're like using the old school alarm, they're putting their phone out, or even some of my kids at the school are able to have their parents set screen time limits where they can like get off at 10 p.m. and then it comes back on at 7 p.m. so they don't miss their alarm. And it could be helpful as a parent to model that behavior for them, like put your phone outside the room or put your screen time on lock too, just to show how significant it is that they're not on their phone at all hours in the night. And obviously this will ease up as they get older. I mean, children obviously move away and everything like that, but that was something that I definitely think is important, because the more time that they have on the phone, just the more negative it really can be. And there are positive aspects, but it's important to have that boundary. So
yes,
thank
this
you.
is. Oh, sorry, Olivia.
No, you're totally good.
Hi, everyone. Olivia, I'm still stuck on Olivia's amazing recommendations. Thank you so much. I was just taking notes. There's some real key takeaways there that I'm really going to integrate into my work. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Tepper. I work with preteens, teens, and adults and families. I work at Boda Therapy. We create small retreats where we teach clients skills, DBT skills. I'm really just grateful to be here and to be part of this conversation. This is extremely important, and I'm really looking forward to chatting with some of you in the breakout rooms and getting into this important data even further. I want to stress that the takeaways that I'm going to be discussing are just based upon my experience in the field, and I'm looking forward to hearing, you know, what key takeaways you bring to the table in our discourse and in our dialogue. But for me, there were a couple standout points that I wanted to highlight. One thing that came up for me when reading this important data was many teen boys struggle when it comes to reporting sadness, anxiety, and loneliness. I think sometimes when you're looking at the data, you also want to look at what's not in the data. And I do think that this is still something that we need to keep an eye on and pay attention to. I often find that young men express academic stress. Academic stress is a safer way of expressing feelings and overall mental distress. I have many clients who come in to talk to me, and they talk about academic stress, and this is kind of like an easy entry point into talking about other stresses. Academic stress it's safe. With that being said, there are some kids that really do struggle with academic stress, and there are other kids that academic stress is just an easy entry point into talking about mental health and feelings. So just looking at those two pieces and trying to investigate a little bit further. Another important point that I want to highlight that came from this data was adult mentors like coaches and other important adults are well positioned to model how to express feelings, but they're an entry point for engaging in dialogue about feelings on a deeper level. This can be a coach. This can also be the drama teacher. This can be the person that is the adult responsible for a club at school. I'm seeing that there are a lot of adults in the community that are amazingly positioned to engage boys and kids in mental health discussions and discussions about feelings. So I'm often kind of taking note on who those adults are, be it the coach from sports or the drama coach or that person who's helping to run a club at school. Finally, another key takeaway that I want to highlight is that I really feel like it's important, and the data show this, that there needs to be non-judgmental opportunities for kids to talk about sensitive subjects. It's so important that we look for these opportunities, and that I believe that if we can kind of highlight those opportunities and really pay attention to them, that we can help our youngsters engage in dialogue around conversations that might be difficult. What are those opportunities? I think that's also a good bridge into some of my recommendations. Forgive me. Oh, thank you so much. The recommendations I have, I believe, are maybe some of them sound general, and I'm happy to kind of dialogue with anyone further after, you know, when we go into our breakout rooms. But establishing a reoccurring time when your kids know that they can talk to you about anything that is happening in their lives. I recommend being communicative and honest about what time that is. For example, a parent might say, at the end of dinner every night, I invite you to share what's on your mind, especially the things that feel too scary to talk about. I'm always available with no distractions at this time every night if you want to talk about anything at all. The dinner table at the end of dinner, it's, you know, if that's something that is a common practice in your home, that can be like the last 10 minutes of dinner can be a place where you can dialogue, and it can be a place where you can create consistency around being in dialogue with your kids. Also, that is a time when you can, I'm moving into my second recommendation, you can model how to express yourself. You can model this for your kids by just using a very simple statement, which is just, you know, when you do blank, it makes me feel blank. Modeling for our kids is so important. And And if we can take this statement and really show our children how to do that with honesty and vulnerability, that can be super, super helpful. It's something that I think takes a little bit of practice, but at the same time, if you can normalize that skill, you'll start to notice that happening with your children. So those first two recommendations: establish this regular time to talk about feelings and communicate openly and honestly, modeling for your children, modeling for them, using this statement, when you do blank, it makes me feel blank. And then finally, the last recommendation I have is ask your kids to identify someone in their life that they feel comfortable opening up to. If they don't have anyone, encourage them to identify someone with whom they can share openly and honestly. Normalize these conversations by routinely checking in with them about who that person is. And that if they don't have that person, if they don't have anyone in their life that they can open up to, ask them what you can do to help them to find that person. Oftentimes, this can be the difference between thriving and not, from my experience anecdotally, is just identifying someone that you can be really honest and open with and vulnerable with. So those are my 3 recommendations, and I appreciate you allowing me to be here tonight to be involved in this important conversation. So thank you.
Good evening, everyone. These are such awesome recommendations, and I'm feeling really privileged to be able to share the floor with both Andrew and Olivia. So thank you so much for having me. Hey, how's it going? My name is Renee. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. And I want to talk a little bit about some national data to discuss trans, non-binary, and otherwise gender expansive young people. It sounds like, while it wasn't explicitly asked if young people are identifying within the trans or non-binary community, in this survey, there's a number of people who are checking off preferred not to disclose, or they're not answering that gender question. And so I think that's our first thing to consider is what sort of indication is it to a trans or non-binary young person when they're not even asked about themselves as we're gathering this data. And so this is something that's changing a lot, but something that I want to bring up as important. I'm going to try and cover a lot of information in about 5 minutes because I want you all to be able to get to your breakout rooms, so I'm going to talk really fast. That said, I might use terms that you're unfamiliar with. And if that's the case, Emily's been gracious enough to drop a list of terms in the chat for you to check out. There's some videos for you to explore. I'm not going to be talking about terms today, but if you have questions about those things, please come jump in my breakout room and I will stay as long as there are questions. If I could have you go to the next slide. I do just want to talk about the Gender Diversity and Resilience Program, which is a newer program through the Child Guidance Center. We see young people through the age of 18 who identify as transgender, non-binary, or who are otherwise exploring their gender identity, as well as supporting their caregivers. Right now, we see folks up through age 18. Our youngest client is 6. Our oldest is going to turn 19 soon. And we offer individual therapy, family therapy, and group therapy for young people and their caregivers. We also have a case manager. We have a psych APRN to provide medication management, as well as connection to a gender affirming medical provider who can do primary care as well as gender affirming hormone care for folks of any age. Next slide, thank you. So I want to talk about what we know from national data. I think what's tricky is when we talk about more marginalized populations, it is harder to get more representative data. But this is a combination of data through the National Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which does ask about sexual orientation and gender identity, as well as the Trevor Project, which is not only an incredible resource for data, but also provides a 24/7 suicide prevention hotline and text line for LGBTQ young people. So what we do know is that 75% of trans and non-binary young people report symptoms that are enough to constitute generalized anxiety disorder in the last 2 weeks. 66% of trans and non-binary young people report symptoms severe enough to constitute major depressive disorder in the last 2 weeks. And when we're looking at how trans and non-binary people people's rates of depression, self-harm, and suicidal ideation stack up against their cisgender and heterosexual peers, over half of trans and non-binary young people have attempted suicide at least once in their lifetime, which is staggeringly large. Most adult, when we're looking at an adult population, about 60% of trans and non-binary adults report attempting suicide at least one point in their lifetime. So that's not thinking about it, that's not considering it, that's making an active attempt. Next slide, please. So the reason that these rates are so astronomically high is we're talking about overlapping identities and experiences of oppression. So this is a combination of stigma experienced from the family, social stigma experienced from peers in their school systems and in their extracurricular activities, and what we also call minority stress. So by virtue of existing as a marginalized person in society, you experience more elevated rates of mental health concerns. So when we're looking at this at home, about a third of LGBTQ young people found their home to be a safe place, only a third of young people. When we're looking at trans and non-binary young people, if folks are rejected from their homes, they experience almost 7 times the rates of depression and are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide. That's controlling for a whole host of other variables. So this is just looking at trans and non-binary young people who've experienced rejection in their homes. 98% of students report hearing some sort of anti-LGBTQ slur regularly, and about half of those students report that they're hearing those slurs from school staff. About half of students surveyed reported discriminating policies and practices within their school that marginalize LGBTQ young people. So that could be things like you can't take a same gender date to your prom, or if you're wearing clothing of another gender that feels affirming to you, that's inappropriate, and students get sent home suspended or expelled. In community, about half of trans and non-binary people report some kind of harassment in a public setting. So this can be everything from name calling and catcalling to physical and sexual harassment. Almost universally, trans and non-binary young people report hearing anti-LGBTQ slurs in their communities. And something that I think is particularly salient to point out, given a lot of the political news in the last couple of days, is 94% of trans and non-binary young people report that anti-trans policies, national anti-trans policies, negatively impact their mental health. We see this not only in states like Texas and Florida, where there are active anti-trans policies on the books, but we see that in other states as well. When this legislation gets passed, suicide attempt rates for trans and non-binary young people rise. Next slide. So I think like this statistic stood out to me as I think particularly salient. So 26% of LGBTQ young people say that their biggest problem is feeling accepted by their family, fear of bullying and trouble at school, and fear of being out and open as their affirmed selves. Whereas about that same percentage of non-LGBTQ young people, of straight and cisgender young people, say that their biggest problem is issues with class, grades, and exams, right? So normal, healthy things for young people to be concerned about, whereas LGBTQ young people are disproportionately concerned about their existence safely in spaces, and that they are in fact loved and affirmed by the people around them. Next slide, please. So what can we do about this? So self-expression is a developmental requirement for mental health. Living and affirming your authentic personhood outwardly and openly is necessary for being the best version of yourself. Next slide, please. So some concrete steps that we can do to help prevent suicide and escalated rates of depression, especially for trans and non-binary young people. So really basic things. Having your pronouns respected, having the name that you use respected, cut suicide attempt rates in half for trans and non-binary young people. It's really simple, right? It's just like basic human respect, right? Using pronouns, I see that as a way of affirming, I see you and you're valid. And that's an outward way of expressing that to trans and non-binary young people. Having access to clothing that feels gender affirming lowers rates of suicide attempt, as well as depression, anxiety, and self-harm. Having at least one LGBTQ affirming space, 35 reduced odds of suicide attempt rates by 35% in the last year. So this can be affirming spaces in houses of worship, affirming spaces in schools, outside groups, but having that one space really does a lot. But honestly, the single biggest predictor of mental health outcomes for trans and non-binary young people is having at least one accepting adult in their life. So having one family member affirm them, celebrate them, care for them dramatically not only reduces rates of suicide attempt, but depression, anxiety, substance use, risk-taking behavior when controlling for a whole host of other things. Next slide, please. I think I have like one more. The last thing that I just wanted to impress upon you is there's a lot of really awesome things about being trans and non-binary, and so talking about it only from a deficits model is not what we're vibing with. There's a movement around gender euphoria, experiencing joy from your gender and living your gender authentically and proudly. And so I do just want to reinforce that, like, celebrating somebody's gender also does a tremendous amount to normalize that this is a healthy and wonderful part of who you are. So thank you all so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Renee, Andrew, and Olivia. That was just the beginning of these conversations we get to have tonight. We are going to open up the breakout rooms. So if you'll just be patient as we pull those up, and then you will each be able to select the breakout room you'd like to join. And we'll have about 20 minutes of maybe a little bit more, 25 minutes in those breakout rooms. So thanks for your patience, and you should get that menu in 1 second. Is everyone seeing the breakout room options? No. Oh dear. I'm so sorry. Some people are joining and it doesn't sound like others can see. Well, Andrew, I will assign you to your room. It's so odd that some people can see.
I just figured it out. It's on the bottom next to share.
Oh, okay. So you have to go to the bottom. I'm so sorry, everyone. And you can select your breakout room. Thanks everyone for your patience. So again, if you go to the bottom bar, you can select your breakout room. Thank you for bearing with us. This is our first time using this feature. For everyone in this room, you can select a breakout room in the bottom bar.
Sure, thank you. So small but mighty, breakout room. But I think one of the biggest key things that came up was just the profound importance of parent support. Even if you're not understanding something, or this is something that's new, trans and non-binary identities are new to you, or you're not sure what words to use or the correct terms, signaling to your child, having open conversations with your child, like, I see you, I validate you, and I respect you, and I respect your understanding of your own lived experience, is really game-changing for young people and their mental health. I think the other thing that we talked about a little bit was and modeling that behavior. And like, young people are very keyed in, young people are always watching and paying attention to how the adults in their lives are showing affirmation, are showing acceptance, are showing support of communities that are different than theirs. So those are some of the big things we talked about.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Renee. Andrew, can I pass it to you and you could share a little bit about your room?
Sure. We talked about what to do with academic stress, which I really was trying to advocate for partializing, breaking things up into their chunks. Oftentimes when kids are coming to their parents with a lot of academic stress, there's an overwhelming feeling that you can reduce when you just break things up into chunks. So, and you can do that by just saying, okay, well, what are the 5 things that you need to do right now? Or tonight for homework, let's write down those 5 things. Let's break them up into their appropriate chunks and tackle them one at a time. The other thing we talked about was what I'm seeing a lot in my practice, which is that there's a lot of other things wrapped up in the statement of like, I'm stressed out about school. And what came up in our breakout room was, I love that 2 parents used this phrase, there are other things wrapped up in the discussion of academic stress. And that's very true. We talked about social pressures. We talked about kind of this fear of making mistakes, and made this connection to social media and just the fact that everything is online and being filmed all the time, that potentially makes a lot of people self-conscious and makes them fearful of making a mistake. That led to the recommendation, or just the acknowledgement, that the ability to tolerate the discomfort of making a mistake is like a muscle, and we can strengthen that muscle. We talked about the importance of building community in the home, to bring friends in, your children's friends, as a way to foster dialogue and foster connection, and how that was another entry point to get kids talking and to kind of create this openness where maybe future dialogues can sprout off of that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Sure.
And Olivia, I'd love to turn it over to you. Can you share a little bit about the conversations in your room?
Hi, yes. So we discussed mostly, we started out discussing kind of like how to encourage confidence with girls. I think it's really important to model certain behaviors for girls, because I think there is a lot in the media, and there's a lot like within even their friendships and with boys and girls and whoever, that kind of feeds them negative stuff. It just does. And I think for parents, it's really important to model like positive behaviors, like with food, with their body, with, I might have done this wrong, but I'm still like a good person. I'm still doing this good, that kind of stuff. We also talked about navigating female friendships and how that can kind of be hard, especially in like the middle school, early high school phase, and how it's important for, I think, to encourage girls to like trust their gut. If this person's being mean, if you see something that you don't like, to speak up. And also, I brought this up, I'm really big on kind of talking in person. I mean, I think our phones are shields for everyone. So facilitating those conversations in person, encouraging your child to be like, you know, what you did wasn't okay, and I'm not okay with it, and that kind of stuff. It can be hard and it's easier said than done, but just kind of setting that tone, you know. We also talked about how there is obviously school avoidance going on right now, and how in your survey it came up that school people don't feel safe in the school building sometimes. So we discussed the many factors that could be. Obviously with COVID, it's hard to feel safe, but something that I was seeing kind of more than that this year is that students don't have like this stamina right now to withstand an 8-period day or however many periods Darien has. They also, it's hard, like the social stamina, like being around your friends all the time, having everyone like always talking to you, that kind of stuff. Yeah, and then we talked, I'm trying to think what else we talked about. We talked a little bit about anxiety and how that is kind of playing a role right now after COVID. But yeah, all around just kind of modeling behaviors and allowing them to have a place that they feel comfortable discussing all this stuff.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Olivia. And I'll see if I can unspotlight you. I'm tolerating many mistakes tonight, as Andrew might say, just working on Zoom. But I'd love to share just a brief thought in closing, but I wanted to share a comment that just came through, that Andrew's point on community and bringing friends into your home was recently reflected in a podcast with Dr. Lisa DeMoore about the importance of knowing your children's friends, especially their parents. So a parent wanted to thank you for that point. And I'm so sorry, Olivia, thank you for your patience. You are still spotlighted. I'm struggling to, oh, you know what? I'll spotlight myself in that way. We're all on the same page. Well, I wanted to thank Olivia, Renee, and Andrew for joining us tonight. I have so many notes that I've taken from what each of you shared, and we hope the parents who are here are leaving tonight with a deeper understanding of how to support your child's mental health and maybe some new strategies to try this week. Tomorrow, we will be sending a follow-up email to everyone who registered with the recording of the first portion of tonight's event, and also a link to the TYTF resource page, which has parent handbooks, recordings from past events, more information on the student survey results, all things TYTF, if you're interested in learning more. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our wonderful presenters, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.